It was hundreds of years since mankind understood the full implication of this allegory of the so-called Noah's flood. People as a whole have never understood the true history and what and where the flood really happened. But there were eagles involved because why would Christ contradict himself? We're going to see here. Apparently he's pointing back to them and those men of old. They were acquainted with the scriptures and possibly a lot of ancient books that have disappeared. They didn't seem to question what he said, but they did question when the eagle ships were coming for them. But there were eagles involved, as well as we take the next warning with Sodom in Luke 17 and 29. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven or outer space and destroyed them all, except for Lot and his two daughters. But we know that there was eagle ships involved because here you had these extraterrestrial messengers translated as angels. They went to the very house of Lot, and since then the archaeologists, they have dug up evidence that Lot, no wonder he didn't want to leave town. He was the mayor of the town. He was the big wheel. And they've dug up carvings from the stones and tablets of that day where it appears he was running for re-election. So he probably was a man of means and position and wealth. And even though it was corrupt, he didn't want to leave. He had a good thing going there. But these extraterrestrials came to his house. We hear about the people in the town. They tried to seduce him until they used some sort of strange weapon on him that caused him to go blind. I assume it was temporary or whatever. And so they stayed overnight with him. It appeared they ate and slept with him. He was a hospitable man. And they must have stayed there a few days because they told him that they were going to destroy the city, and they gave him the time. And he says, wait a minute, don't do that. What if I could find 50 good people in town? So these extraterrestrials that were stealing said, all right, go look for him. Then he come back, well, how about 40? And they narrowed it down. He said, look, if you can find 10 people, we'll spare the town. But apparently the only people that were allowed to be spared were just Lot and his two daughters. But anyway, without going into the total proof of the eagles intervening in both cases here, it seems something sent this fire out of heaven or outer space. Eagle ships, I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And then we find Christ warns of eagle ships intervening again here in future times. But man has failed to get the connection until now. For in Luke 17 and 37, Christ tells us wherever the body is, there will be the eagles or the ships of the great space Lord. But the translators, they never understood. So some inserted dead bodies and changed eagles to buzzards. We go on and we find in Ezekiel 1 and 4, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and there was a brightness about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of amber, and out of the midst of the fire. Now we find Ezekiel on more than one occasion, he had a meeting with great extraterrestrial lords of the eagles or ships. In fact, he was taken on 4 different trips into outer space. Again, in Ezekiel 37, 3-5, he is told that they have the ability to restore the dead. Now, I know I've read this, I have quoted it in church, and so forth, and I never ever got the full implication of it. And here, one of these great lords of space, I doubt it was the Almighty himself, but a very high-ranking extraterrestrial, called an angel. And he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? I answered, O Lord God, thou knowest. Again he said unto me, Prophesy upon these bones, and say to them, O you dry bones, you shall hear the word of the Lord. And thus the Lord God unto these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. Now back in Luke 17 and 37 is where they erred, by not understanding that Christ was speaking to his saints as a whole, as a corporate body of people. Wherefore They are in the final tribulation. There he will be over them. The author of Matthew also confirms the return of the eagle ships, as in Matthew 24:27-31. For as the lightning, you see, we're talking about ships, it's so fast and equated to lightning, cometh out of the east, and shineth even to the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever, now see, King James went nuts on us. Wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. And verse 29, immediately after the days of these days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be taken, or shaken, I mean to say. Now the King James Version really let us down. They switched from body to carcass, thinking dead again. Where's the victory if he's coming back to pick up nothing but dead people? Sound to me like he lost the war. I'm sure he's not going to. Verse 27 tells of the great extraterrestrial ships moving like lightning from the east to the west, possibly with speeds never recorded here on this earth. Now, these three verses that we just quoted, they're loaded. Man's never really conceived of the great implication of these three verses, or could they possibly until our present age. What is this for? It's describing a great battle here that's to take place on the earth. Well, should we call it the Third World War or Armageddon by the religious world? And then we're told of the eagles coming from the east. Is where the morning star rises, and Christ and his angel, in John Revelation 22:16, he told that he was the bright and morning star. We cover this in greater aspects and more detail in other chapters. And just what is an eagle, and how can we make such a claim? Well, my friends, as we continue on with the 30th verse, I was quoting you from Matthew 24th chapter, now 30 and 31, and it says, And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in the heavens, and there shall all of the tribes, in other words, the nations, countries of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four corners of the winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Well, there's many descriptions. We could go and take off and quote too from Revelation, where it talks about he's coming out of space riding a great white horse, and we show in other chapters what that is. It's talking about a Zeus, or the great mother pilot ship that's ahead of these great armies that's coming. There's many descriptions here. We find that verse 31 tells of warning sounds of ships preparing to land. Stand clear. Let's see if eagles are vultures picking the bones of the dead, and if not, what is an eagle ship or eagles? Luke 17:24, as the lightning that lighteneth out of one part of heaven, or under the sky, or outer space, shineth to the other part, even unto heaven, so also shall the Son of Man, or the son of Adam, be in that day. It says that these eagles are fast as lightning. Are they not referring to firing laser beams and etc.? We find the word eagles in Strong's Concordance. If you care to look it up, it's word 105, eitos. And it's pronounced that way. And from, they say it's the same as word 109, like an eagle from its wind-like flight. Word 109, A-E-R, pronounced A-A-Y-R. It's from the word amini. It means to breathe unconsciously without conscious effort. Respire by analogy to blow air as naturally. Then Strong's Concordance, they go on, they refer to the circumcumvient. Now, circumcumvient, it means the high-bred, fastidious ones, as to make a wind-like flight by breathing effortlessly. In other words, a pressurized cabin. We're talking about aircraft or as we find in the Old Testament, they were called flying tabernacles. They equated them to a church or to like a house. They had nothing else to equate it to because they just had a mindset as to their times. They had nothing else allegorically to equate it to. And it appears that they're describing the one flying these extraterrestrial crafts on their missions to our world and others in outer space or deep space. We note that we have thousands of words in our present day language, and it's derived from or carried over from Latin, Greek, and German. And there are some authors that say 70% of our English language, it comes from the Hebrew. As we check Webster's Seventh New Collegiate Dictionary, they give the following meaning of the word circumcumvient. Circumcumvient means to surround in a circle. Ambry, to go around, surrounding, encompassing. Now, if that's not describing something extraterrestrial that flies in a circle, now we note that it describes that the people were surrounded. That is circular. Ambry is to go around like oscillating, spinning an extraterrestrial ship. Matthew 24:31 from the Frere Fenton translation, it says, "He shall send out his messengers with a loud and a powerful bugle, and they will collect all of his chosen from the four winds, from one end of the heavens," that's sky or outer space, "to the four corners of the earth." Now, example of eagles picking up people in the past, we go to Acts, the 8th chapter, 38, 39, and 49 from the James Moffat translation. "So he ordered the chariot to stop, and both of them stepped into the water, and Philip, he baptized the eunuch. Then when they came up out of the water, the spirit, or the wind of the ship of the Lord, caught or took up Philip away, and the eunuch lost sight of him. He went on his way rejoicing, while Philip found himself at Azotus, where he passed on, in other words, or flew, preaching the gospel in every town till he reached Caesarea." Now we note that the verse 39, they use the word spirit that caught Philip up, was rendered wind in Ezekiel, Frere Fenton, and the Moffat translation, but not the King James, when describing the action of these ships that they called, back then both those Bibles, they translated cherubims and or eagles. We find it spelled in many different ways from the different translators. Sometimes it refers to cherubim in Hebrew in the Old Testament as eagles, especially by Christ, as in Luke 17 it was an eagle, because the priest, he watched Philip till he was taken up out of sight, and the eagle sat down at Azotus. So when we read caught up in the air, which was mistranslated, the word was air, aitos, wind-like flight. So anyway, what it's describing here, he goes into a ship in a pressurized cabin. Means he can blow air, he can breathe easily, and it could also infer that it was possibly as a jet-type ship, appearing to blow out air, flames out of the bottom. Now, if you're taken on a flight into the air, as the Greek says, caught up in the air, not air. The airplane is a vehicle that takes you to different planets or places. Yes, he will pick up the dead because the Scripture says so. But using buzzards, the whole understanding of what was actually meant is lost. We go to 1 Thessalonians 4th chapter 15 and 16, quoting from one of my favorites, again the Moffat translation. "For we tell you, as the Lord has told us, that we the living who survive till the Lord comes are by no means to take precedence over those who have fallen asleep. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a loud summons, with the archangel calls, when the archangel calls and the trumpet of God sounds, the dead in Christ will rise first, and we the living who survive, we will be caught up along with them in the ships of the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord Yahshua forever. So it goes on to say, now then, encourage one another with these words. The word heaven is from sky or outer space, because help is coming from outside of Earth's realm, as there doesn't seem to be any here with the so-called lords of this planet. And as the day goes by, I don't want to play prophet of doom and gloom, but as this one world government emerges more and more, we're going to see some terrible carnage and chaos, and the Almighty who's watching from space, he's not going to tolerate it. Now we find the word cloud, cloudy, and clouds. We cover that in another chapter. But the word eagles, karub, and iron mountains will come through as come down out of outer space. Matthew 24:3 tells that Christ gave this message to his disciples in private, or in the Mount of Olives. What I'm saying here, the Mount of Olives is a spaceship of the Almighty. That's why they had privacy. Do we have to wonder why was it that it seems very strange? Moses and Christ and the disciples, they always seem to meet on a mount. Now, if the Mount of Olives was a geographical location instead of, it was, what I'm trying to say, I'm getting tongue-tied here, it was not a geographical location as we and I among the other guilty parties assumed for so many years. But instead it was what you call a mount ship or great eagle ship. The word east reminds us in Genesis 3:24 as the east of the Garden of Eden. We find the translators, they didn't understand which choice to use for east. Here are their choices, as we've listed by Strong's Concordance. What does this have to do with eagles? Well, the different words that they could choose from seem to refer to angels or extraterrestrial messengers coming out of the garden, as we've proven in other chapters. Now, I would ask you to save a lot of time here. If you haven't got a Strong's Concordance, my friend, I would have no other concordance myself. But if you don't have one, you should get one. And there are several words. I may have to get a magnifying glass to read these. On second thought, I will, to nail it to the barn door, so to speak, because our subject is so controversial that we definitely are going to have people who are going to be uptight with us. But in searching out the word eagle, I was referred to, you may want to write these down and get your concordance out and look them up. I was referred to 69:18. We have the Hebrew word here, Kadesh, or Kadoshi. They go on to tell us that it was taken from 69:12. It implies sacred, ceremonially, or morally, God by eminence, or an angel, a saint, a sanctuary that's holy, or one that a saint would live in or come out of. 69:19, Kadaka, it means a prime word to inflame, burn, or kindle. We know it's not the house that's on fire, but something that came out of that house. 69:20, Kadaka Hath. They say that it comes from the root word 69:10, I believe it is. It means inflammation. Now get this. You say, wait a minute, what's this got to do with it? Bear with me. It talks about disease, burning ague, or fever. As you'll definitely want to get our tape if you're interested in this. One I've entitled St. Paul's Radiation Burns. Just like we'll get into the fact that Gilgamesh's friend died from the disease he got from this eagle. It goes on as quite clear he died of radiation burns. And we'll take you back and we'll prove to you that when one of these great ships were landing, reading from the Friar Fenton, it talks about when Moses was descending this great mount as he was being brought back, the mount ship or eagle ship. He was told to tell the people, and it seems like he had access to an outside speaker, and he told the elders or the possibly the Leviticus priesthood, get the people back, to have them surrounded in a circle like, and they said they were not to touch the skirts of the mount. And in that one chapter, he tells you 3 different times they'd get sick and they would die if they didn't go wash their clothes and their bodies, and they weren't to have relationship with their wives for 3 days, so they wouldn't infect them. So here we put all these little clues together as we're reading about what Christ said. He makes it quite clear from where these ships come. They come from a great house in space. It tells about how they, it looks like they're burning with fire, like the so-called burning bush. And then here's another description how it causes disease. All right, and then they take you to 69:21. The word is Kodim or Kodim. It's from 69:23, I believe. It means therefore or front part, hence by orientation the east, often advanced eastward. But the east wind, eastward. And so it's given us an implication of what direction or where these come from. Because, my friends, throughout all of these tapes, we're probably going to give you hundreds of examples from all different nations, over and over in their religion and their history. They constantly talk about men who come from Venus. Now, I didn't write all this stuff. I didn't dream it all up. But 69:22 from the they quote you the Chaldean. It is called Kaddish. Corresponds to 69:18, a holy one, a saint. What we would say if we were writing it in our day and age, we would say the pilot pilot that flew one of these eagle ships. Then they take it to 69:28, Kodam. A prime route to project oneself, precede, hence to anticipate, hasten, usually for help, come, go, flee, before, and so forth. In 69:24, Kedem. And they take that, they say from Kaidma, from 69:23. It means the front or the place, the forepart, the east, or time, antiquity, often used before, anciently, eastward. Aforetime, ancient time, before the east end, or part, side, word. From everlasting, forward, old past. So if you really wanted to get wild, you might say somebody was literally traveling through time to our age. But, I mean, that's just a little speculation. Then we have another word, 69:25. It's from the Chaldean, and it's Kodam, Kodam. Or another word in the Chaldean, such as in Daniel 17:18, they call Kedom. It corresponds, they say, to 69:24, before, from thought, me, please, presence. And we find that we can prove by reading Daniel there was both good guys and bad guys, because we know that in the afternoon, what was it that Daniel prayed for 2 hours, and this extraterrestrial angel showed up to him and said, look, Daniel, I'm a little late. I heard your prayer the first time. I'd have been here sooner, but I had to contend with the angel of Asia. So, are there still good guys and bad guys up there contending with each other? Have we got just bad guys here on the earth intervening in world affairs and continuing to create the great wars? Well, there's just a lot of speculation. We'll leave that alone. But 69:26 Kidma, they say from 69:24, it talks about the forward part, east and often, advance, on the east or in front, eastward. So we have all of these clues. But I think that I'm too far ahead of myself and too far ahead in some of my thoughts or evidence for present day man, because he's not prepared for this. He has a different mindset. But you can't deny the last thing that Christ said in the book of Revelations. And he said, I am the bright and morning star. In other words, I am from there. 69:42 Kadesh, a prime root, to make, pronounce, observe as clean, ceremonially, morally, consecrate, dedicate, hallow, be kept, holy place, keep, prepare, proclaim, purify, sanctify, lead oneself holy, and etc. So, as we noted in 69:18, it was speaking of an angel or a saint who seemed to reside in a very special sanctuary, and they refer you to 69:42, which was talking about a hallowed place, apparently to keep saints in. And 69:23, it speaks of hasten, meet usually for help, come, go, meet, prevent, such as interceding. 69:24, it implies it existed in ancient times, and goes on to tell us, and it still does, from everlasting, old, past. Now 69:25 talks about a presence. 69:19 describes it, speaks of the power of flight and flame, burn, kindle, and it also implies those who have no knowledge go rushing up to one of these. I hear all these people say, oh my, if I just saw a spaceship out in the field, I'd just go running up to it. Well, you might want to go to the burn ward and get treated for radiation. And I think I would wait till I had an invitation. I'd want to get a look at the guy that got out of it, and I believe I'd want to question him a little bit. Not that I would have power to stand up to him, but I'd want to see whether he was one of the good guys or the bad guys. So if this is not trying to tell us about the eagle ships that are coming out of the great mount of the Almighty, we see in other chapters of cherubims or cherubims and eagles of Moses and Christ. We go back to Exodus 19:13 of Moffat. There Israel pitches camp in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God. Exodus 19:4. You have seen for yourself what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you safe on eagle's wings, and brought you thither to myself. Eagles are smaller crafts than mounts, so I believe at this time, and they accompany the great hills of steel that Ezekiel and Zechariah talk about, or the great mother ships. Now, as Christ mentioned in Luke 17:37 of the King James Bible, and Luke 17:29, he just finished telling how there were extraterrestrial interventions at Sodom when it rained fire and brimstone from out of the sky, and he told about they destroyed him. And I believe this was done with these eagle ships. And we know what Christ said, and the implication was, he said he went to a far country, in other words, outer space, another galaxy, possibly. And like MacArthur, he said, I shall return. And we know that he goes on to say that he's coming back to rule over this earth. He calls his footstool. And he said he'll rule with his extraterrestrial watchers, as in the book of Daniel, as a heavenly eye in the sky. The Egyptians speak of the eye of Horus, or the eye in the sky, or the eye in the flying shield of Horus that could see man's deeds here on earth. Let's go to Psalm 68, 17, and 18 of the King James Version. It goes on to say, and the chariots of God, now they switch names on us, are 20,000s, even thousands of angels, and the Lord Yahweh is among them, as in Sinai in the holy place. Thou hast ascended on high. So, if Sinai's on high, my friends, maybe you got one over in the desert, but I'm looking to the one that's up there. And we'll find the same name. This sounds so squirrely, but we're going to find out that it is truly talking about what we've long assumed was a sister planet, Venus, and we thought it was a world, and our scientists say you can't live on the outside of it. Yes, that's right, but you can on the inside. It's a great space station, just like those that they speculate about, Deimos and Phobos, that rotate around the planet Mars, and some feel that these are ancient space stations that are derelicts that used to house men in ancient antiquity. And how do we know they aren't still to this day? Oh, there's a lot of speculation. But let me go on and quote this. Thou hast led captivity captive. Thou hast received gifts from men. Even the other nations outside of Israel called it the holy place. Yea, for the rebellious also, that the Yahweh God might dwell among them. Psalm 68, 34 to 35 from the King James. Ascribe your strength unto God. His excellency is over Israel, and his strength is in the clouds. O God, thou art... Now, wait a minute. In the clouds. And we think he's got spaceships hiding up here in the clouds. That's possibly so. But a peculiar thing about this strange planet that turns opposite of ours in what they call retrograde. We're going clockwise. It turns counterclockwise. Has no magnetic north, no magnetic south. And even here, David is telling us about it in the Psalms, that it's covered with clouds. To this day, Venus is still covered with clouds. And we sent this, what they call it, the Pioneer spacecraft up there to photograph it. They tried to use infrared, and they tried to use radio transmission to penetrate these 6 clouds, they say, that are of sulfur, that's emitted out of 2 large prominent towers on there. They say, well, they must be volcanoes. But it's covered with clouds, but we're going to cover this more in other chapters in great detail that will really excite you. O God, thou art terrible out of thy holy place. The God of Israel is he that giveth strength and power unto his people. Blessed be God Yahweh. King David was shown this, was for latter days, as Mark 13, 26, 27, and of the King James. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and he shall send his angels, or messengers, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from the uttermost parts of the earth to the uttermost parts of the heaven, or in other words, outer space or other mansions or places of abode. Mark 13, 34, 37. For the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house, and gave authority to his servants, and to every man his work, and command the porter to watch. Porter, it means a person stationed at a door or a gate to admit or to assist those entering, as Webster's 7th New Collegiate Dictionary tells us. He goes on to say, watch ye therefore, for you know not when the master of the house coming, or even, or at eve, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing in the morning. Now, my friends, like we find that when we go back to Peter, where he said he would rail against Christ, he would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed. You look it up in the concordance, and there was a garrison of Roman soldiers stationed nearby. And so what Christ was talking about, before they blew the bugle in the morning for reveille, that he would deny and wasn't talking about any roosters. They're kind of unreliable. Goes on to say, at the cock crowing or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. I have been suspicious of that, or in the morning. Was this another corruption of the translators, also referring to the morning star? And what I will say unto you, I will say unto all, watch. Acts 1:9-11 from the King James. And when he spoke these words, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. In other words, whatever he was flown up in, I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt here, it was an eagle ship. And then when he got up into the clouds, they couldn't see him anymore. He was out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel. In other words, some kind of, a lot of people wore white clothes, but it says white apparel. It was describing space suits, but they didn't know what else. They didn't say robes. They said white apparel of some sort. Which also said, you men of Galilee, why stand you gazing up into the heaven, or in other words, sky or outer space? This same Jesus, which was taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven, sky or outer space. So we go to Matthew 24 and 29. I think he makes it a lot clearer. And immediately after the tribulation of these days, the sun shall be dark, and the moon shall fail to give her light, and the stars shall fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. We would ask you to go to our Star Wars, and you'll find that the stars are H-bombs or ICBMs, in other words, continental ballistic missiles. But it goes on, we find comfort in that chapter that we find that the saints are not to worry. He has a plan for you, which we'll discover later on in that chapter, that tape. For our Fenton, Matthew 24-30. And then shall appear the signal of the Son of Man in the sky, and all of the tribes of the earth shall mourn when they shall see the Son of Man coming upon the clouds of the heaven, and with power and full rectification. He shall send out his messengers with a loud and a powerful bugle, and they will collect all of his chosen and the four winds from one end to the other end of the heavens. Now remember, these men walked with Christ. Matthew and Luke, they all knew each other. They ate together. They walked together. They walked with the Messiah together. So one uses the word eagles, and the other one, he exclaims how they're coming and what they're going to do. One just verifies the other one, and each one goes into more detail than the other. And it goes on, we will discover what clouds are in the Old Testament. If you're just a New Testament Christian and your ministers told you it's a bozo no-no to read the Old Testament, well, see what you missed. The Old Testament is the New Testament conceal, and the New Testament is the Old Testament reveal. Verse 31, again it tells us he sent an extraterrestrial messengers to collect his saints. Exodus 4:27 of the King James. And it says, and the Lord, these extraterrestrial messengers of the Most High, they said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. Wilderness, my friends, this was referring to outer space. He was taken there in an eagle ship. But let me read on. And he went and met him in the mount of God, and he kissed him. No, Moses met Aaron in the mount of God, not on top of it, not outside of it. And you might say also from another rendition, they went in sus or eagles or cherubims. Exodus 7:7 tells us Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was about 83 at this time. Exodus 11:4 tells us that there was more to the Passover than just the unleavened bread and the slaying of the lamb, which represented the Christ, the Paschal Lamb, and the Messiah that was come to redeem his people. who was to die at a future date. But the Passover was to remind us of what took place when our ancestors put the blood on the doorposts and the lintels over the door. In other words, my friends, it was a marker to be seen from overhead by extraterrestrial aircraft. It was an aircraft marker. As a great space station passed over, causing great upheavals and so forth. Now in verse 14, it goes on to say this, and this day will be unto you for a memorial. You will keep it a feast to the Lord Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an ordinance forever. I don't care what your pastor told you. This is what the Almighty said. And how they get the idea that when Christ was nailed to the cross, this was done away with. We don't have to sacrifice a lamb. That's the only thing that was done away with. He was our lamb. As said in King James, said he come to fulfill the law, mean to fully teach. He also says he didn't come to change the law one jot nor one tittle, and he gives a warning to anybody who says, those who have taught the least of my little ones err according to the law shall be called the least in the kingdom of God. But that's a long, debatable story, but as long as you're not using a Fenton or one of the better translations, you're just using the King James, my friend, you're going to stay lost. But I think in this crucial hour, it's time to get serious as a heart attack and to investigate outside of our realm of primitive, dark age, caveman understanding. Because there's something radically wrong. If we're not under the law, then we've got chaos, and that's quite apparent. And why is the Almighty come back to judge the nations? If there's no law, then he's unjust. Because the Scripture tells us where there's no law, there is no judgment. So in essence, that feast day has been watered down to communion, and they've forgotten about the extraterrestrial messengers and their message of warning, and how they passed over and protected the children of the Most High. Note, the Jews did not accept his coming, and the Christians do not believe he meant it to be kept. In the New Testament, where it said Passover, even after the crucifixion, the translators took out the word Passover, and they substituted the word Easter. Just check your concordance. I used to be offended by what seemed to be an error. Easter for Ishtar, meaning Venus, as it passed close to the earth during the period of the Exodus. This was to be remembered by Israel to the Almighty as a memorial forever. We have to stop and think, why was the sun and the moon darkened for 3 days? There had to be something very gigantic pass in between. And those of you that are familiar with the Strong's Concordance and you know how to use it, then I would suggest that you get it out and you start to use it. As we cover in other chapters, I used to be quite curious about this great stone or this rock that followed them in the desert. I think if somebody had an open mind, was very honest, they would find out that the rock, it was also an ancient name, the ancient idioms and the etymology of the language. Venus and other planets were referred to as a rock. But so much for that. For years I was puzzled as to why Easter was used only once in the entire Bible, and knowing that it should have read Passover, as the Hebrews called it, the Greeks used the word Pascha. So why didn't English translators, why didn't they put in Passover? We find in the companion Bible, it's the King James with thousands of scholarly footnotes and commentaries printed in England. They had this comment on Acts 12:4, but let me read the paragraph first. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quadrants of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Page 1603 7 footnotes of the Companion Bible. Easter, the Greek, it means Pascha, the Passover, and Easter is a heathen term derived from the Saxon lead up to the judgment seat. Now, whoever put this in must have understood that judgment was above, and possibly that it was Venus, so they call Ishtar was corrupted to Easter. What they attributed to the Saxons, as they felt that they were nothing but a bunch of barbaric heathens who believed in looting their neighbors and carrying off all the different blonde honeys. I think they got it wrong. I believe that the Isaac's sons, which the Hebrew would say Beth Isaac, meaning son of or son of Isaac, who seems to be special sons chosen to be the spiritual leaders over the rest of the sons of Israel. Now, according to Romans 9, 9th chapter, 6 to 8 from the Amplified Bible, I don't use it extensively, but at times I think that, as they say, amplified, they break it down into very simple English. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't, but I think that it is very good for people who are not familiar with it and helps them to understand. Now let me read the 6th verse from the Amplified. However, it is not as though that God's word has failed, coming to nothing, for it was not everybody who is descended from Jacob Israel who belongs to the true Israel. Verse 7, they are not all the children of Abraham, because they are by blood his descendants. No, the promise was, your descendants shall be called and counted through the line of Isaac, though Abraham had an older son. Then they refer you to Genesis 21, 9 to 12. Now let us go to the 8th verse. It says, that is to say, it is not the children of the body of Abraham who are made God's children, but it is to the offspring to whom the promise applies, and it shall be counted as Abraham's true descendants. Now, did the confusion come about because the I is silent in the Hebrew and they were called 6 sons? Well, we'll just leave it as that. As we quote in another chapter from the great Jewish historian Harry Golden, who's the Samuel Clemens of the Jewish world, he seems to confirm that there is a possibility among the European people and the what is called the Saxon people, that they are some of the tribes of lost Israel. So didn't Isaac's sons know that there was more to the Passover than unleavened bread and the Paschal lamb? They knew at the time of the Exodus that Venus passed over the earth, causing great disturbances in nature, causing great calamities, and the angels, or the extraterrestrial messengers, flying over Egypt, causing death and destruction to man and beast of the Egyptians. Now, did the rabbis who helped put the King James Bible together, did they not notice Easter in the book of Acts? They left it there. Maybe they understood the true meaning, which the modern scholars have lost. Revelation's 4th chapter 1 to 8 from the Friar Fenton Bible tells us of great eagle ships. The following is the account of John being flown to a great spaceport, as I call it. It was so large it was beyond the comprehension of even our generation. Now, we notice all you have to do is get a Strong's Concordance. You go back and look, and where it talks about, we cover this in another chapter, the pillar of smoke that followed them by day and the pillar of fire by night. There was something gigantic that passed over, as we cover in the other chapters. As you look it up in the concordance, it speaks of a great space platform. It can hover, it could shoot up or down, ascend, descend, it could go off at angles. Now, I didn't write the book, and this was written, translated 90-some years ago, before they were even aware of the advent of airplanes or space stations. So it's up to us to decide whether we want remain a bunch of ignorant dopes and remaining in a caveman mentality held back by our prejudiced religious ideas? Or is the great creator, you have to be quite a science to be a creator, does he have some creative sons? And have we lost all of this, hidden under the blankets of religiosity, with sugar coatings on the top by uninformed pastors and teachers? Well, so much for that. But this was entitled The Vision of Things Which Must Come to Pass. Revelation 4, starting with the first verse. After this I looked, and I saw a door open in heaven, and the voice that I had first heard, like a blast, coming to me, saying, "Come here, and I will show you what must happen." After that I immediately became inspired and observed a throne set in heaven, and upon the throne an occupant. And the occupant, in appearance, he resembled in brilliancy a jasper and sardis stone, and the throne was encircled with a rainbow like the sparkling of an emblem, and surrounding the throne were 24 thrones, and seated upon these thrones 24 elders, clad in white robes and golden crowns upon their heads. And from out of the thrones passed lightnings and voices and thunders and 7 fiery lamps. Be sure and notice the similarity here to our genie and the bottle chapter, or tape, let's say. 7 fiery lamps burned before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And the front of the throne was like a transparent sea, resembling crystal. And in the center of the throne, around the throne, 4 beings full of intelligence as to what is before and what is behind. The first being resembled a lion, the second being resembled a bullock, and the third being had the face of a man, and the fourth being resembled a flying eagle. And the 4 beings individually possessed 6 wings around and beneath and full of eyes, and they have not rest day or night, proclaiming, "Holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who comes." Verse 7 is not to be confused with the smaller eagle ships. It is one of the great aircraft carriers, and was probably miles across, and one of them was referred to by Ezekiel as a mountain. One of the 4 great ships that patrolled the 4 corners of the heavens. The 8th verse said it was full of eyes. The Egyptians spoke of the eye of Horus. They also called them the flying shields that watch men. The 6 wings are like today what we would say Air Force wings or squadrons, or smaller ships under the command of the larger transport ships. Check the word in Greek for wings. They totally lose it, saying it might mean feathers. Then they refer to another word which means sprinkled as water. We have the same situation as the story of the genie in the bottle. In the pictures, the man who's supposed to be carrying, they said, contained rain. The implication in both accounts is smaller ships coming down like rain, as there was many of them coming to land in the mothership or to earth. Revelation is one of the great unsolved mysteries, has long puzzled the world. The Farrar Fenton Bible titles the 4th chapter of Revelation, Visions of Events Which Must Come to Pass. It was only until the last 4 decades that we begin to understand how this could remain a mystery. But any child who's read Buck Rogers or watched Star Trek, how could he ignore this and this great preponderance of evidence here? And now we see that there was a great hangar door that opened in what? A great extraterrestrial ship in the sky or upper space, called heaven by the religionists. To the confusion of the masses are those who are turned off by the religion version or perversion of going to heaven. It must have been close overhead, because John said he heard a voice over the outside speaker calling him and telling him to come up. I doubt that he was beamed up like Dr. Spock, but was flown up inside of the great ship, and he went through the hangar doors into a small shuttlecraft that was called an eagle. Now we find verse 2, he describes the pickup and flight, and the King James describes the second verse better. We know King James Version added the word spirit instead of being caught up in the air as in an airplane. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne, or shall we say at the controls. So the seat of a pilot in one of these great ships, it'd be best described as a throne. It's only mindset that he had at that time for something to compare it with. Now here's where everybody gets ahead of himself, thinking he was immediately into the mothership. What John was describing was his flight, and we remind you that King James changed the word wind, as in a wind-like flight, to spirit, which totally confused man until now as to the true meaning. Now the word spirit was one of the ancient descriptions of the power that caused the ship to fly in the air of the wind. So we have John describing his pilot in the cockpit of this great aircraft and describes it as a throne, which was the one thing that he knew how to compare to this wonder sight. Note, he said that the one pilot sat on the throne or at the controls. Verse 3 is where he describes the brilliancy of the different lights and the control panel and so forth. Then he describes the canopy over the top of the ship, and he gives us a good description of an arch, like a rainbow, as over our jet fighters or helicopters. Now the rainbow was a description of different cabin lights and panel lights reflecting on the overhead canopy like our modern fighter planes. Now in the 4th verse he tells of 24 other ships accompanying his ship, and he describes their suits as being white, and he used the word robes. We remember that the 2 pilots that were left behind at the tomb of Christ, who wore these shiny space suits, which were described in some by translators as having trousers like jumpsuits, which our modern day pilots wear, and the crowns on their head were obviously gold-colored helmets. Verse 5, he describes the ship giving off fire and sound like thunder as they blast off. The voice he heard was from the ships in communication, I believe, with one another. Verse 5, he describes the ships as giving off fire and sounding like thunder as they blast off. The voice he heard were the ship's controls in communication with one another. The 6th verse, it tells of a great number of those ships surrounding the great mount or the mother ship, and their canopies, they glistened like a great sea of glass. There must have been a humongous number of them there, and he doesn't allude to exact number except when he's talking about the larger ships, apparently. Now King James, he describes 4 greater larger ships or beasts, as in the 6th verse. Notice Fenton says beings, as he doesn't know how to describe them, but he said that they're full of intelligence. Was he describing great computerized equipment which was operated by these intelligent men or messengers? King James, he probably better describe them as being round and full of eyes like windows or portholes. Now we notice in verse 7, the one which has thrown students for hundreds of years, as it describes beasts. It speaks of a lion, a bull, and the face of a man, and flying eagles. Now the world has not understood that these were nothing more than squadron emblems on these great ships he was unable to describe. As we go to the, let's see, I've made a note here, if you just bear with me. As we go to the Greek, and it was pushko, a prime verb meaning to breathe voluntarily but gently, thus differing on the one hand from 41:51. This denotes probably a forcible respiration. On the other, from the word 109, which refers to like a breeze. By implication, a reduction of temperature and evaporation and a chill and so forth. And he goes on, they refer you to 41:51. It's pronounced in the Greek pucho. A prime word, it means to breathe hard, breeze, blow. So as we've covered in other chapters there and verses, we've told about the circumcumbiant, that means to fly, to be caught up in the AYR, some type of a vehicle, to breathe without effort. So were they describing cabin temperature control. Next we have a word from the ancient language as to whether it's Hebrew or just incorporated into the Hebrew language and then picked up by the Greek, we're not sure. And it goes on that, let's see, letters are so small, and the Greek, it's A-G-R-I-A-L. I'll take a shot at pronouncing it. It's agar lo. It says of uncertain derivation, a basin or a charger. So you see a charger like a horse, something that charged like a war horse, but it had the shape of a basin. An old-fashioned basin like people used to wash their hands in, and it resembles a so-called saucer type that over the years been observed by millions of people in the last 40 years. They describe it also as a charger, as like a charging horse, or one of the Sioux that we described in other chapters, like the iron horses of Ezekiel. What is all this to do to what with what we explained Revelation 4th chapter is to go back and read Ezekiel 1 to 28. Ezekiel, he describes his experience with the chariots of God and the squadrons or brigade symbols which were used by the children of Israel. They gathered around their earthly tabernacle. It was a copy, a type, a shadow, an allegory of extraterrestrial things that was to remind them who they were, that they were pilgrims, and that they were not to forget their origin. This, I believe, this ancient tabernacle was round, and as some European scholars whose understanding is that the tabernacle in the wilderness actually was round, not oblong or square, as we've covered this in other chapters. We find in Isaiah 40 and 31 we have misunderstood for eons of time. I remember visiting a little backwood church that incorporated into their song and drawn great comfort from it, thinking that someday spiritual lightning would tap them, energize them, so that they might do or run the 27-mile Pentecostal race to qualify to leap several pews with a single bound. But what we have to understand, there was more meaning to this being caught up in we shall fly, we will run and not grow weary, we will rise up as on eagle's wings, as what I was referring to, their song that they sang. A lot of times I get ahead of myself, but I think we've missed something really marvelous that shows it's a reality, that it's not some esoteric hocus pocus. There's no magic involved, and the Almighty's not going to say Shazam, but He has real people manning real ships, just like we are real, and like we will be restored to real bodies. And I won't argue as to how perfect they are, but it tells about one day putting on immortality and overcoming death. Now to Isaiah 40 and 31 of the King James, we have learned by other references that mount does not always mean mount, but the act of mounting, ascending, as in this case. It tells us of those who wait upon the true King of the universe to return. It says they shall mount up in eagles and fly. They shall run, and running is faster than walking. Walking is an idiom, and it's a mistranslation, meaning to fly is flying in outer space. We've pointed out and proved that Christ walking on water was actually flying in a ship over the water. Does run and not be weary mean go quickly, to say the least. Other planets or other places, to these mansions that He spoke of as in outer space that He's preparing for us. So with walk we have learned is to fly and not to pass out because of being pressurized cabins or flying ships. I think by using this new understanding, doesn't the Friar Fenton translation make this more clear? Who trust the Lord shall flourish, fly on strong eagle's wings. They shall march and faint not. Friar Fenton used the word march as the ancients described one great army going against another, not always on foot or horseback, but we remember the Almighty's example of His banking His great ship and accompanying ships as they went against Pharaoh's army. Now some of the King James versions put a footnote saying renew their strength, which means to read change for renew, implying a change in war tactics from horses and foot soldiers to the ability to fly these great ships of the Almighty. We've explained that man has remained in the dark for centuries, not understanding the true light and meaning. We go back to the 14 and the 1500s when men hungered for Scripture and light. So scholars would make maybe 50 handwritten copies of the Scriptures, but they weren't always good copies. But poor ones, in many cases, they also added the opinion of the translators, eventually becoming accepted by the church fathers. There's quite a number which we could list, but trying to keep this shorter, we're going to have to forego it. We find in the 4th chapter of Jeremiah, it shows why the translator is lost due to the lack of understanding of the words. The 4th chapter of the King James, verses 4, starts out saying, God's called Israel. Listen and learn. Note, verse 4, 12, and 13, and 21, as we pointed out in other chapters, Jeremiah had learned from Genesis 1 and 2, explaining what had happened to ancient nations and civilizations of ages long lost to historians, leaving us without clear records. But Moses apparently learned from extraterrestrial teachers of the follies of long lost races of antiquity, possibly our progenitors. We can only assume that the extraterrestrial explained or re-explained, should we say it, to Jeremiah. And we can see quite clearly that Jeremiah had been in contact with extraterrestrial messengers, which we called angels, and to learn by history or his story, so as to not repeat history's mistakes. And we found that the people of these days, rejecting the laws of the eternal, and once again, we're returning to chaotic times. They were warned by Jeremiah of extraterrestrial interference, even to their destruction. The 4th chapter is entitled, God's Called Israel. Circumcise yourself to the Lord. Take away the foreskin of your heart, ye men of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like a fire and burn that none can quench, because of the evil of your doings. 12th verse, even a full wind from those places which come unto me. Now also will I give sentence against them. 13. Behold, he will come up as clouds, with his chariots be as a whirlwind. His horses, we taught you before that means Sioux, a type of ship, are swifter than eagles. These ships are swifter than the eagle ships. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled, he says. Verse 13 tells of horses swifter than eagle ships. A horse is a Sioux, and so the smaller fighter ships or transport ships, like our jet fighters. Now, if these eagles are coming to intervene in the earthly affairs, where will they be launched from? There are many scriptures in the ancient book that comprise of what we call the Bible that they've ignored and overlooked because man's failed to understand them, mostly because of bad translations. The 4th chapter, verse 21 of Jeremiah tells where they will come from. Verse 21. How long will I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? Jeremiah 4th chapter 21-22 from James Moffat translation tells us the Almighty is sick of earthmen's senseless wars, which they continue to have because they ignore His commandments. That was written approximately 2,700 years ago, and has man changed? No. But here's what He said back then. How long must I see war signals and hear the trumpet blast? My people are senseless. They care not for the eternal, dolts of a household, devoid of understanding. They well know how to do wrong, but they have no mind to do right. But what did the ancient writer mean in verse 21 by the word standard? The Hebrew gives several possibilities. One of them is Naka, N-A-C-A-C, and it's pronounced Nasash. A prime word. Root word meaning to gleam from afar, to be conspicuous, to raise a beacon like a light or a lighthouse or a house of light. Another ancient writer who paralleled Jeremiah is Isaiah 49:22-23 from the King James Version. Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will lift up my hand to the Gentiles, meaning the nations, set up my standards to the people, and they shall bring thy sons in their arms, and thy daughters shall be carried upon their shoulders. Now the ancient idiom here is trying to tell us, I will lift up my hand, meaning he will put his eagles into the air as they represent his hands that he fights with, his weapons of war. Then he declares that he will set up his standard, the great space station where these eagles are launched from, which will move closer to our earth and become brighter than our sun. And the proof is found in Isaiah 59 and 19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. Here he describes the sons of God being in the west, and our planet is west of Venus. Is Venus called Eastern, or the morning star, morn star? Christ said he was the bright and morning star, and the rising of the sun, misunderstood as sun in Hebrew, is Shemesh, pronounced Shamesh, from an unused root meaning to be brilliant by implication, east, ray, arc, notched battlement, window. As we've shown in other chapters, the Egyptians and the North American Indians, they call their priest the Shemesh, a high priest carried over from ancient times, the hope of the Indians, Hopi Indians. They still make what they call a Kachina doll. They call it the Venus doll. From their legends, when astronauts landed here from Venus, just like the Aztecs who greeted Cortez, they thought he was a lord that had returned from Venus. When he launched a space shot, we have to wait till there's a window open in space. As in this ancient word implies, they imply the word battlement, which I suspect means like a flying fortress, as referred to giant planes in the Second World War. Now the Hebrew and Chaldean dictionary for sun then refers you to Beth Shemesh, pronounced Beth Shamesh, house of the sun, but they're not sure, and they say that it could possibly be Beth Banyeth, probably from Beth Hashtatah, house of the acacia. Was this not the same place from which the eagle ship came from? Moses erroneously called a burning bush instead of a Sioux ship. The Bayeth, pronounced Bayeth, means family, court, daughter, a hanging home as in space, a temple within, inside of something. Like Job said, he came forth from the bosom of the Father, and the womb, inside of something, womb of the morning star. As we quote Christ saying in Luke 17:37, he said that the eagles will gather, in the red leather edition of the King James, verse 24, tells of them coming from a great distance, but it's lost in English. For as the lightning cometh out of one part of the heaven, now this verse 24 here, from under heaven shineth unto the other part under heaven, so also shall the Son of Man be in his day. In Daniel 12, King James, it states that there would be raised. However, originally it stated that all would be raised. We're talking about the resurrection, but some to eternal shame. Here's where the eagles come in. The disciples did not know or understand the scriptures that they were descendants of those people who came out of the Babylonian captivity, and they'd been proselytized to other pagan religions. They were probably not exposed to Daniel's teachings, some of them, but they were for the most part future happenings. Now, Daniel 12 tells of the first resurrection, which would take place shortly after Christ's resurrection. Now, where and how, where did they go to paradise, to this heaven, in real bodies? We cite 3 different Bibles who quote Job differently, but all prove the point of man being restored to a physical body which would be greater than the one subject to death, sickness, and weakness that we now possess. But nevertheless,